الحمد لله الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعد وبعد. Inshallah, it is our hope that we will be able to reach from the year 865 to the year 965 Hijri, inshallah. There's a lot of material to go through, and we're now entering into the phase just before the colonizing of the Muslim world. So we're entering into a new phase in which the kuffar, unhappy with having to trade with Muslims and having to deal with Muslims, decide to try to find another continent or new lands to use where they do not have to trade with Muslims, where they don't have to deal with them. And we will find this occurring later in Jim Crow laws that they passed when they took over India and other things, where because they don't want to deal with you as human beings, they pass specific laws and certain legislations, even though they're in your country, where they don't have to deal with you. We start covering the area from 865 to 895. As of 865 AH, a huge flood inundated the houses in and around the outskirts of Mecca. The flooding continued into the year 867 AH until the water actually came into Al-Masjid al-Haram and rose near to the door of the Kaaba. A major incident came in 872 AH when the city of Homs, it rained stones from the sky around the rainy season. Some people were killed in the process. The stones that it rained down are mentioned as having been hot, white in color, and bead-like. So these stones that it rained down on the people, because normally Homs has a rainy season, but when the rainy season for Homs came, it did not rain the normal heavy rainfall. Rather, it was these very hard bead-like pebbles that killed some people. In 884 AH, the Abbasid head Al-Mustanjid Billah died. Now, I want you to understand something important. The Abbasids, as we looked at in the last lesson, we had went through 3 successive rulers fairly quickly. The Abbasids were winding down, dying out, becoming a thing of the past. And because they were dying out, it's always Allah's way, when a horrible tragedy befalls this ummah, that Allah always offsets it with something spectacular that happens. So one horrible thing befalls this ummah, Allah offsets it with something spectacular that comes about. That's always been Allah's way. A huge lightning bolt struck Al-Masjid al-Nabawi in 886 AH and destroyed some of the wall, treasure, and gold trellising that had been made around it. However, the burial place of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and Umar al-Faruq were all intact. Now, the point of this is, we'd been told by the Prophet ﷺ to not overly ornament his grave or the graves of other people to where it was ostentatious. And because they stored treasure in that area next to his grave, big gold bars and diamonds and other pieces of treasure, it was only a matter of time before they would be called to task for this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left the Rawdah, the actual area where he's buried, the area where Abu Bakr is buried, the area where Omar is buried. He left that whole area alone. But the area around there that had been built up with trellises and really ostentatious, he struck that area as a warning. Now, after this, there was another massive earthquake in Mecca that rocked the city from one end to the other. So Mecca at this time had suffered floods, it suffered earthquakes. Many things were happening during this time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was preparing the ummah for things. On the 7th of Jumad al-Ula, 886 AH, on Saturday, the 7th of the Ottoman rulers, Muhammad ibn Murad Khan, died. After consolidating all of the area around him and the rule of the Turks, Sultan Muhammad, also known as Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, the Conqueror, took the city of Constantinople. This is the same one in which Imam Ibn al-Imad, rahimahullah, he says about him that he was born in the year 835 AH. He was given the Sultan, the governance, in the year 856 AH. Many people, although the Ottomans were around before, many people hold the conquest of Constantinople as the real standpoint from where the Ottomans began. Because Ottoman rule at that point was indivisible. Because the Ottomans had all these areas around the Bosphorus, and there was that one section of Constantinople and the towns around it that were holding out, Ottoman rule was always contested. But once Constantinople fell, then the Ottomans no longer had to worry about anything contesting their rule. And the Ottomans became one huge Jama'ah, and they became the rulers over the ummah in terms of some of the earthly things. Now, it should also be remembered, this is the same time that Andalus fell. This is the same time as the Spanish Inquisition. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims murdered. The same thing as the fall of Granada or Granada, in which 100,000 Muslims are killed in one day. The chief mushaf used reading in the city of Granada is thrown from the top window to a jubilant crowd that tore it to pieces. This is what happened in this same time. So at the same time that was happening, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought about something else spectacular by bringing the Ottoman era in full swing. Now, he was given the Sultan in 856 AH, and he ruled for 51 years. His father Murad, it was mentioned that just the mentioning of his name scared his enemies. But when Sultan Muhammad Fatih, when he ruled, when he first took over, he was only an adolescent, and many people doubted what he could do. He wanted Constantinople because the ruler Constantine over Constantinople was quite harsh. And although the city of Constantinople had been devastated by Crusader runs, many of the churches have been devastated by Catholic churches because these people were Orthodox Christians, they were Byzantine Rite. They were still holding out against the Muslims and were still offering armies from the Crusader era and those times after to help with trying to undermine and destabilize the Muslims. So Sultan Muhammad Fatih, what he did is he sent some of his troops to go and to find out the thickness and width of the walls around Constantinople, because he had heard that they were the thickest walls ever built. And he actually paid a trip in person himself, in which he scaled the walls, climbed over the wall, got inside, took soil and sand samples, scaled the wall again, got back on his horse and rode back, just to get an idea in person himself what type of force he was looking at. After that, he decided to have a cannon designed, and it would be the first of its type in which the cannonball would be large enough in which an actual person could fit inside of it. That's how large the cannonball was. And he wanted this to be the most powerful cannon that had ever been seen. He, at the time of the invasion of Constantinople, fired more than 12 of these cannons at the walls and devastated their defenses. But Constantinople still had their harbor and the Bosphorus, which they used a series of chains that were held together on each side that would keep boats from coming into the harbor. So Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih changed the rules of war by cutting down all the forestry above the Bosphorus and running more than 50 ships over wooden planks that had been greased with whale blubber or fish blubber. And they slid down over 300 ships into the harbor, leaving the government of Constantinople wondering, how did these 300 ships get on the other side of the river without the chains being lowered and all the other ships for Constantinople are on fire. And they took over Constantinople. Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih prayed in the Hajjah, or the Hagia Sophia, which at that time had been the Byzantines' largest church, but was left in ruins from invasions. He prayed inside of this church, and as the church had been left in ruins, he had it built up as a masjid. It is now a museum piece. But this was the central masjid, and he wanted a masjid built more glorious than that one. And they started building on one in his lifetime. So Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih was the one who took Constantinople, and is made reference to in the hadith in the Sahih of Ibn Hibban, that blessed is the army that shall conquer Constantinople. Blessed is its leader, and blessed is its army. Please keep in mind these individuals are Maturidis in their creed and Hanafis. If Maturidis are deviant and Hanafis are deviant, then the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith is endorsed deviance. We need to explain this to some of our friends who may have a misunderstanding regarding a hadith or fiqh, because these are the people that took Constantinople. They weren't Arabs, just to let everyone know, they weren't Arabs. These were these Turkish people, these Hanafi scholars, Maturidis, and they changed the face of world history by now bringing the Muslims back into the doorstep of Europe. Now, Imam Ibn al-Imad, rahimahullah, he says further about him. He says, now remember, Ibn al-Imad is an Arab. Now look at how devoid of racism his words are about this Imam. He says, in volume 9, page 516 to 517 of his work, Shadrat al-Dhahab, he says, quote, he was from the most noble and mighty of the sultans from the house of Uthman. He was a great king, a righteous man, great of manners and good of skill, the greatest of the kings in jihad, the strongest of them in perspicacity and hard work. He established his army on fortitude and righteousness. He trusted on Allah more than anyone else and depended on him more than anyone else we can think of in that time. He is the one who established the governance in truth of the Bani Uthman. He is the one who established the laws and jurisdiction of Sharia in the land that he took. He has numerous virtues that cannot be mentioned just in this place alone. He has numerous good qualities that can't fully be mentioned in this place by itself. And the virtues of what he has done could not fill the books in days and nights if we were to write. The impact of what he represents cannot be wiped away. And the years and epochs of time will never wipe away the achievements that he has brought about. His campaigns broke the backs of the cross of those wretched crusaders, those idol-worshipping demons. And he is that noble one who opened up the gates of the great city of Constantinople. His ships landed on the other side of the harbor, shocking them who had believed that their plans were above defeat. It is his army, their champions, that we are proud of, his men who were the real men. And they spent 50 days in the most severe and difficult trials, but they struck fear in the hearts of the kuffar and the rebellious sinners who felt weakness. Yes, this man is a sword of Allah that was unsheathed upon the kuffar and the sinful ones. Allah used him to break the backs of the kuffar and their kufr. He is the one that was patient, and he remained that way until Allah brought him goodness. It is also mentioned in historical reports that legions of angels came down on that day that were seen by witnesses, both Kafir and Muslim alike. And this also led to his victory. At the coming of Constantinople's victory, this day, it had been after 50 days. Let me remind you that the victory day was Wednesday, the 20th of Jumad al-Ula in the year 857 AH. He prayed in the largest of the churches of the Christians